So today's Sunday's daf is daf Chaf Hey, and we got yesterday to 3 lines from the top of Chaf Hey Amud Aleph. So we actually finished the daf. And remember yesterday, I get started slowly, if more will join. Yesterday we discussed the question of whether or not well, we discussed a lot of questions, but one of the questions we discussed yesterday, the really important was whether a person who is not completely married, so she's not a Rusa or a Shemeret Yavam, whether they also can be included in Sotah. And the opinion in our Mishnah, which we said yesterday was Rabbi Yonatan's opinion, is that neither a Shemeret Yavam or a Sotah or a Arusa can be a Sotah, but they can get kino in order to become asr, prohibited to their husband and to the person potentially. So ask the Gemara today, and we'll see why this is connected. It's going to take a little bit of time to get to the point. But says the Gemara in the third line, Iboilu, they had a question. If you recall, at the end of Masechet Ketubot, and towards the end, we talked about cases where a husband can divorce his wife and not give her a ketubah, or maybe give her a ketubah if she misbehaves. Let's call it that way. So one of the categories of misbehaving was overet al dat. She goes against dat. We talked about Moshe, dat Yehudit. Remember we talked about, so there's different levels, but these are things where she goes against quote unquote religion, where she acts in a way that is not considered to be the norm at that time potentially. Maybe it changes over time, but it's not prohibited. So for example, she goes out with her hair uncovered. This is the example of the Gemara in Mishnah in Ketubot. She goes out and she's talking to a lot of people. She's being social in a way that was unacceptable at that time. So Ibai says the Gemara, what about those cases? Overet al dat Yehudit, a woman who is overet al dat, 3 lines from the top. And so therefore the Mishnah said, the Gemara said in Ketubah that the husband can divorce her and doesn't have to give her a Ketubah. But tzricha hatra'a lahafsida ketubata ain't tzricha. Does he have to warn her, right? Like other things, again, this is not an avera. She hasn't done anything wrong, but she went against the societal norms. Let's just use hair covering or not wearing clothing that's considered to be acceptable. So do you have to warn her before you do that kind of thing? Mi amrinan, do you say that kivan de overet al dati lo bay hatra, since she's going against what's accepted religion, it's accepted knowledge, so she knows it's wrong. Everybody accepts, because these are just communal things anyways, right? So the whole definition of it, of what's considered to be dat, is based on what's acceptable in that community. So clearly, you know, it's not like, unlike a mitzvah where you wouldn't know it unless someone told you that you're supposed to keep Shabbos or not wear shatnez, for example. These are things that are known. Oh, Dilma, or maybe Tibai Hatra'ah, you should give her Hatra'ah, because no matter what people know, until they're warned about the consequences, they don't really think about it. The Hadrabe, if she changes her mind, she'll then change her behavior. So maybe she's acting inappropriately, but if you warn her that this will lead to her losing her ketubah, she will start acting appropriately. So that's the question. We'll see why it's related to Sotah in a little bit. Tashma, well, let's try to bring a proof from our Mishnah, right? Our Mishnah said, Arusa v'shomeret yavam lo shotot v'lo tuba. A woman who's in Arusa, she's engaged. A woman who's a shomeret yavam, who the yavam or the arus says to her, I don't want you to be alone with that person. She goes and she's alone with that person. Says the Mishnah, she doesn't drink the mesotah, and she doesn't get a ketubah. Now, what's the implication? That mishta hu deloshati, she doesn't drink the water. But when you said to her, I don't want you to be with that person, that has an implication. Now, lamai, what's the implication of telling this woman who's arusa, I don't want you to be with that person? If you are, there's going to be some punishment. What's the punishment? Must be that you basically have to warn her in order for her to lose her ketubah. So this, again, it's not so clear exactly why this fits, but let's just say that a woman being alone with a man is considered to be overet al dat. So it falls into the category of things that she's not supposed to be doing that are not a prohibition. It's not necessarily yichud, right? The door could be open, people could be coming in, but it's inappropriate. So clearly you need to warn her, and the reason you must need to warn her is in order to take away her ketubah, which implies that in order for a woman to lose her ketubah for being overet al dat, she needs to be warned. Amar Baya, not necessarily. We're like 10 lines from the top. Lo, that's not why you have to warn her. It's not why you can warn her. It's the osra alav. It's to answer her on that man, right? Because remember, a husband who warns his wife, and his wife then is stira, until she drinks the mesotah, he's not allowed to sleep with her. Now, of course, in this case, she doesn't drink the mei sotah, so therefore she'd be prohibited forever. And that's the implication. Says the Gemara, Rav Papa says, no, it's lashkota yushin nisua. The reason that the man warns her is not because you have to warn her for her to lose her ketubah. It's because let's say he then marries her. She's in arusa. He says to her, I don't want you to be with that man. And then he consummates the marriage with her. They have a chuppah, they have a beautiful big wedding, and then she's alone with that person. So the kino that he gave her when they were engaged has an implication. It doesn't implication while they're engaged, has an implication for later when they're married. So that's the purpose. Kiditanya, as we learned in a Braita, first word on whatever line we're on, 5 from the narrow line, so the bottom of the narrow, ein mekanin la arusa. You cannot give kinoi to a woman who's an arusa, lahashkota kishi arusa, to give her to drink when she still is an arusa. Because as we said yesterday, Pasuk says tachat ishech, you have to be under a husband, not when you're an arusa. Avol maknin, you can do kinoi, la arusa, lahashkota kishihi nisua. You can give kinoi to her when you're arusa. If she then is alone with the person when she's nisua, then she would get a sotah and she'd have to drink. So you can't prove it from that case. Amar Rav, okay, let me prove it from the next case in the Mishnah. Tashma continues the Mishnah, 2 lines from the last narrow line. It says in the Mishnah, Almana the Kohen Gadol, if a woman who's an Almana marries a Kohen Gadol, which is prohibited, right, but the Kedushin is Tufsin, so they're really married, though they're not allowed to stay married, or a Grusha v'chalutza, a woman who's divorced to the Kohen Hedyot, or a Mamzer Netina Yisrael, or a woman who's not allowed to marry that person, or a Bat Yisrael Mamzer Netin, right, the woman is kosher, the husband is a mamzer or a netin, so they're not allowed to get married. In all those cases, although they are married, they are not allowed to stay married, and the rabbis would make them get divorced. In all those cases, if before they actually got the divorce, the husband accused his wife, who he's not allowed to be married to, that of cheating on him, and he gave her kinoi, and she did stira, said the Mishnah, lo shotat v'lo notot ketubah. She doesn't drink, and she doesn't get her ketubah. Again, the same exact limud. We're in the first wide line. Mishtahu de lo shatya. All it says is she doesn't drink. Ham kinuyim mekanila. The kinoi has an effect. He has to warn her. Again, what's the purpose of warning her? Lamai. Why is he warning her? Ila osran alav. If you're going to say the answer that Abai gave before, that he's warning her because then if she's alone with the person, she can't stay married to her husband. Of course, she can't stay married to her husband no matter what here because they're a prohibited relationship, right? Ha-asir and v'kaimen. They already are prohibited. Elalav, it must be lafsidan ktubatan. That the reason that he warns her is because if she goes against his desire and she is alone with this man, then she's overet al dat and she will lose her ketubah. But you see from here that in order to sort of implicate a woman in being overet al dat, you have to warn her first. That's the first proof. Amar Rav Yehuda, no, that's not a good proof. Mediskarta, sorry. Rav Yehuda of Diskarta, I don't know where that is, said, look, that's not the reason why you have to warn her. The reason you have to warn her potentially is la'osra libal kiboel, which would be the opposite, right? You want to, sorry, that's not correct. The box says it this way. La'osra aboel kibal. It just changes the llama to an aleph. That you want to answer her on the boel like the baal, meaning the almana is married to the Kohen Gadol, right? The Kohen Gadol is not allowed to stay married to her, but he wants to be married to her for whatever reason, right? He's going to be forced to divorce her. But now she's cheating on him, or he's afraid she's cheating on him. So he says to her, I don't want you to be alone with that person. What's the implication? He's not going to stay married to her no matter what. If you say he doesn't have to give her a ketubah no matter what, he doesn't have, then what's the implication? Says Rabbi Yehuda Midiskarta, the implication will be that remember, if a husband says to a wife, I don't want you to be alone with that person, and she is alone with that person, then she, even once she gets divorced, is never allowed to marry that person. She's prohibited on the boel, the accused, because we don't know if they actually did anything, but the one who's accused of sleeping with her, like her husband. And so that's the implication. If he warns her, she becomes usher. If he doesn't warn her, she doesn't become usher. So there's a big implication. It's non, as we learned in a Mishnah, Keshem she'osra libal, which is a Mishnah later this week, just like she becomes prohibited to her husband once she does kinoi and stira, kach asura liboel. She is prohibited to ever marry and sleep with the boel. So therefore, that might be what the effect of warning her is. Ami Rabbi Chanina Basura. So Rabbi Chanina Basura said, okay, I got a proof for you from the last case in the Mishnah. Tashma. Let's quote the last case in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, the elu shebeidin mikanin lahen. Remember, we had a category of people in which beidin takes over the right of the husband and does the kinoi. Why does Beit Din do that? Because the husband's not capable, right? A woman is married to a man, but he loses his capability to observe and to monitor her behavior, either because he loses his mind or he is in prison, right? So in those cases, the Beit Din is mekanin lahen, right? And that's, for example, mishnat charesh ba'ala, if the husband becomes deaf, so he's no longer able to communicate after he married her, o nishtata, or he loses his mind, o shahaya chavush beit asurin, or he's in prison. Now, says the Mishnah, obviously, if Beit Din warns a wife and she goes and has stira, she's not going to drink mei sotah, because remember, the mei sotah has to come from the husband, and the husband is not capable here, right? So lola hashkotam, this is a quote from the Mishnah, it's not in order because Beit Din is going to give her to drink, it's because the poslam ktubata, it's to make her lose her ketubah. Because once Beit Din warns her, don't be with that person, if she then goes and is with that person, then she clearly broke the rules and she's going to lose her ketubah. Shma mina, what you see from here is that you need to warn her. Boi hatra'ah shma mina. It's a great proof, right? You see from here that if the woman just went ahead and was mityached or hang out with this guy, even though that's considered to be overet al dat, I'm explaining how Rashi understands it, even though that's considered to be overet al dat because she's going against the societal norms by hanging out with the man who she's not married to and when she's married to someone else. But still, the fact is that if they hadn't warned her, they hadn't given her kinoi, she wouldn't have lost her ketubah. So you see from here that you have to warn her in order for it to be having impact, as the Gemara says in Masechet Ketubot. Says the Gemara, well, that seems like a very clear proof from the end of the Mishnah. Kulu, my time Why didn't all the other Amuraim who brought proofs from the first case and the second case, they didn't read the end of the Mishnah? They weren't paying attention? Says the Gemara, well, no, because there's a lot more nuance. You made it sound very obvious. But remember, what's the case over there? The case is a woman who's married to a man, and then the man loses his mind, or he is imprisoned. So he's no longer present, right? So there, says the Gemara, the woman, although she knows she's married, she's not allowed to sleep with someone else, because her husband is not around, her norms changed. She no longer has fear or respect or sort of behavior that would be expected in the presence of her husband, because he's not present, either because he lost his mind or because he's physically not present. And so in that case, it could very well be that she acts in ways that would be inappropriate, but we don't blame her for that. Like, we understand her hesitancy or her behavior. So that's why Beit Din has to warn her. But in a regular case where a woman is married to a man and he's present, if she goes against his will and hangs out with other men, there maybe you don't even need to warn her and she will lose her ketubah without warning. Says the Gemara, Dilma Shani Hata, maybe there it's different. Deletla emata debal klal. She has no fear of her husband because her husband's not a player. He's either, again, physically incapable or physically away, right? Mentally, or physically. So there, it's not clear. Okay, so therefore, that's why other people didn't bring a proof from there. But the Gemara seems to think it's a good proof, and it says that a woman is overet al dat, which again is important for the next thing, means she goes not against mitzvot, where we talked about overet al dat Moshe, which is where she violates commandments. Remember, we had a Gemara where she fed her husband non-kosher, or she didn't do Shabbos, or whatever. There, you have to divorce her, potentially. But if you're overet al dat, she goes against the religious norms, I'll call it, which, again, probably changed with every generation, hopefully, right? But in the times of the Gemara, it included things like going out without her hair covered, going out without whatever clothing was considered to be normal, sewing in the shuk is one of the things, toveh b'shuk is one of the examples, which I guess was considered to be a very public thing. Those are all things that a husband can divorce his wife and does not have to give her a ketubah, but he has to warn her that what she's doing is inappropriate.
She's basically an aguna. I mean, because he may never get out of prison, or he may never come back.
It's a very big problem.
So
it's a tremendous problem. There's no real easy way around it. We're not doing Gittin yet. We'll get to Gittin, but there's no easy solution if a husband is competent at the time of the marriage and becomes incompetent.
Right. I mean, so maybe it's not that she's overet al dat. I mean, in a certain way. I mean, like she's
right. That's exactly the Gemara's answer. You're correct that we understand, right? So that's the Gemara says that maybe there we don't hold her as culpable as if she's in a regular relationship, but But the
Right.
reality is that she is still married. If she sleeps with another man, she's an Eshet Ish.
No, I understand, but she's also there's you got to
But
understand.
I think aguna is a fair term. The Gemara. Well, we're going to discuss this in Keaton, but I wanted to tell you ahead of time. There's not an easy answer. There's not an easy way for the rabbis to just cancel the marriage, but it's a very big problem.
Okay. Well,
Um,
I mean, maybe they could have had like a, and there might be something you could put in the ketubah or something like if I can't, you
so
know.
right, so we're gonna discuss this again because the Gemara talks about all these situations where if she had known at the time of the marriage, she would have never gotten married. But that implies that he hid it, right? Not that it
No,
was
but what? Let's say,
new.
he lost his mind or something,
No,
or
but
he,
something develop, it's not like a neder, right? Where you can like that's. Anyways, we'll get to this in Gittin, but I want to say it's a very frustrating, and it's not just then. It's a big challenge today because I mean, it doesn't happen that often, but it certainly happens. That
right. I mean, it could be like an accident or something where.
certainly happens, right? So, anyways, Ibaylu. Now, ask the Gemara a new question. Where I don't know how to say where we are, but somewhere in the middle of the daf. Ask the Gemara, what if a woman's overet al dat? A woman acts inappropriately, a married woman, she goes out dressed in a way that for whatever their societal time was considered to be inappropriate. But ratzah, but her husband doesn't care, or he's willing to overlook it, right? So we said in ketubah, he can divorce her and not give her a ketubah, but he doesn't want to divorce her, he wants to stay married to her. Ask the Gemara, is he mekaima or in mekaima? Is he allowed to keep her and as a married to him or not? Do you say, mi amrinan? Do we say that the Torah says it's up to the husband? The husband has a right to divorce his wife. Halo kapid. He doesn't mind, so he doesn't have to do it. Odilma kivan de kapid kapid. Now it's not clear exactly what that means, but meaning since regular people are upset about this, we don't want to keep a situation where one person goes against the rules. That's one explanation, right? So do we force him to care? Tashma, so let's try to prove it from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says, Elu shebeidin mikanin lahem. These are the following people in which Beidin does kinoi on behalf of the husband. For example, Mishnah tcharesh bala, if the husband becomes unable to communicate. O nishtateh, or he becomes mentally unstable. O shayichavush b'beit asurin, or he's physically away. Now, I don't get it. How could Beit Din say we want to do kinoi for this person, right? Because we think the husband would want it. How do we know the husband would want it? If it was a rule that he has to, then then it's clear. But if it's up to the husband, how could you say that Beit Din can do this for her? Avdi Beit Din midi dedilma lo nichale lebal. How could Beit Din do something that the husband may not approve of? Maybe the husband in prison doesn't mind if his wife's acting this way. Says the Gemara, well, that's true, but stama de milta, the regular thing, kivan dover daldat, he meinach nichale. Since she's going against the norms, usually the husband wants to keep her in line, or he wants to maintain societal norms. I'll say it sounds better. So it's not a proof from the Mishnah. So now, what about the next? So we don't resolve that question yet. Okay, we'll keep discussing it. What about the next case? And this is sort of getting closer to our Gemara. The next case of a husband and a wife is, what if they do kinoi, right? What if the husband says to his wife, I don't want you to be alone with that person, and then he regrets it, or he changes his mind, right? He says, I no longer care. So ask the Gemara, Baal shemachal al kinuyav. If a husband warns his wife not to be alone with a certain person, and then he changes his mind, is kinuyav machul? Oh, machul. Can you cancel it or not cancel? Do you say mi amrinan? Well, the kinui de baal talar rachmana. Right? The Torah obviously applies this on the power of the kinui of the husband, and therefore the husband doesn't care. Ubal hamachole, the kinuyav. The husband has passed it up. Oh, Dilmar, do you say kivan de kanila meikara? Since he warned her originally, lo matzi machole, he's not able to undo it. And again, you could see why this is very connected to the question of overet al dat, right? Because there's a lot of similarities between kinoi saying don't be with that person and a woman acting inappropriately. So what's the halacha? Tashma. So let's again try to go to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said, Elo shebeitin mikaninla. These are the cases where Beit Din acts on behalf of the husband without the husband telling them to, right? And gives kinoi to a woman. For example, Mishnah Tcharesh Bala, the husband loses his ability to communicate. Oh, nishtateh, or he loses his mind. Oh, shayachavush beit asurin, or he's not present. Now ask the Gemara, why? How can they do that? Right? If the husband can negate it, how could Beit Din come to her and say, we heard that you're hanging out with Shimon, we don't want you to hang out with Shimon anymore. And then if she does, she's going to lose her ketubah. She's going to lose everything. But if the husband had said that to her, he can always change his mind. Beit Din can't change their mind, apparently, right? So where am I? Ask the Gemara, Avdina midi da'ati baal machale. So actually, Rashi understands the question is a little bit different here. That the husband is going to come back from prison, or he's going to get healed from his illness, right? And then the husband will come in, and they'll say, "Oh, your wife has been warned that she's not supposed to hang out with Shimon." Husband will be like, "Oh, I don't mind hanging out with Shimon. He's a great guy. He's my best buddy. I don't care." And then it will turn out that he's basically putting down Beit Din, right? Beit Din acted on his sake, and then he's dismissing the act of Beit Din. So that seems to be something we would like to avoid, right? So if you do anything, ati baal machole, and the husband will come and forgive her. So that's where, well, it's true that could happen. But stama de milta, again, the regular case is adam maskim adat Beit Din, that a husband will agree with what Beit Din is doing. So the norm is certainly acceptable, and Beit Din can act according to the norms. Okay, Tashma, let's continue. Remember, we had way back at the beginning of the Masechta, that Mosrim lo shnei Talmidei Chachamim shema yavola b'derech, that they give 2 Talmidei Chachamim to the husband, to the family, the couple, right? The husband and wife have to travel. Now, on the road, of course, people are not watched. You don't really know what's going to happen. So they send along policemen, right? But not policemen, Talmidei Chachamim, people who are there to police their relationships so that they don't sleep together. Because remember, she's not allowed to sleep with her once she is started the path of the Sotah. Doesn't matter, but I don't get it. If the husband can cancel it, if he sleeps with her, what's the big deal? Let him just say to her, you know what? I changed my mind. I don't no longer mind that you were alone with that person. I decided I'd rather work on our marriage. We'll forget about it, right? So lichle, likinuyo, livo. Why do we care if the husband sleeps with her? If he wants to change his mind and sleep with her, let him change his mind and sleep with her. Says, well, that's exactly the whole point. The whole reason we send Talmidei Chachamim is we don't send policemen. We send people who know the halacha, because they could tell the husband, look, if you want to change your mind, you can change your mind, but then you're changing your mind, right? It's not like you can still hold her accountable. If you sleep with her on the road, as we learned before, then the waters don't check her anymore, right? Because then basically he's absolved her of the whole thing. So that's the point of the Talmidei Chachamim. The Gemiri, they teach him the boy lemival, if he wants to rekindle their marriage and sleep with her, relay. So they say to him, achle the kinuyech ubala. So you got to forgive your kinoi, forgive the process, and sleep with her.
Why do they need 2 of them?
Sorry?
Why 2?
That's a good question. So I guess they do both functions, because they can we said this earlier, that if he does sleep with her, you want 2 witnesses to report about it. Otherwise it becomes, complicated, because we don't, he said it's 1/8, it's not enough. So interestingly, the Gemara is not going to like this in the end, because we're going to conclude later that although the husband can forgive the kinoi, he can't forgive the stira, right? Clearly this Gemara doesn't hold that way, but we're going to say later in the opinion that he can get rid, if he warns his wife not to be with Shimon, he can then change his mind. But once she has been with Shimon and had stira and is on the way to Yerushalayim, he can't undo the whole thing, right? So that's how we're actually going to paskin, maybe, or that's how the Gemara seems to paskin. But clearly now we're of the opinion that it's completely up to the husband. Up to the last second, he can say, "I take it all back. I'll go back and stay married."
That's when the Talmidei Chachamim, after the stira and the key.
Right, because when you're going to Yerushalayim, it's after the stira.
You're going to Yerushalayim already.
Right, we're going to the Beit Din, yeah. Tashma. Now let's says the Gemara. Well, let's prove it from the following brayta. The Amar of Yeshaya, right? Shlosha devarim sachli zeiri manche Yerushalayim. Zeira. I was whispered. I got this Kabbalah from Zeira, who was one of the famous Yerushalmis. He told me 3 different interesting halachot. First of all, Baal shemachal kinuyav machu. And if a husband says to his wife, "I don't want you to be alone with that person," and then he regrets it, changes his mind, he can take it back. And he can cancel the kinoi, and then she can be with the person, and she's not going to be a sotah. That's one. And the second is zaken mamre. Remember, the case of zaken mamre is where you have a rabbi, a zaken, who rebels. He paskins against the court. So the Beit Din, the Supreme Court, said certain halacha, and he gets up and says, I don't care about them. I have my own interpretation of the halacha. Okay, it happens a lot today. But back in those days, you had a Sanhedrin, and this person argued with the Sanhedrin, right? So the Torah says that you kill that person, right? So it was very significant. That's called a zaken who rebels, right? But said Zeira Me'anshe Yerushalayim that if Ratzu Beitin Lemcholo Mochlin Lo, if Beitin wants to forgive him, they're able to forgive him. So just like a Sotah, it's fascinating to bring all these things together, right? Because it's the same idea. That person's Sotah from the halacha, this woman's Sotah from her husband, right? But in that case, said Zeira, you can actually, Beitin can say, we will forgive this elder. We know he sinned. He admits it. He does whatever the case is. They can forgive. And furthermore, the third case of Sotah, basically in the pasuk, is the case of a child, right? A ben sorer moreh, right? So again, we all know the halacha of ben sorer moreh, a child who rebels. They bring him to court and they kill him. Says the Zeira, the same thing is true. A ben sorer moreh sheratzu aviv imo limcholo mochalin lo. They can forgive him. They wonder which parents would not have done that, but nonetheless, we'll get to Sanhedrin one day and we'll discuss Ben Sorer more, right? But those three things are all the case. These are the three things that Zeira told me. And says Rabbi Yeshaya, when I went back to the south of Jerusalem, where did we say yesterday? Somewhere south. And I looked, wherever we said, I don't remember. And I told this to my friends, right? Meaning the Chachamim who I learned with, Al Shnayim Hodeli, they agreed with two of these, which is the Sotah and the Ben Sorer or Moreh. But Al Zaken Mamre Lo Hodeli, they did not agree about Zaken Mamre, and they said that by Zaken Mamre, Beitin cannot forgive him. Why? Shlo Yerbu Machlokot BeYisrael. Because you don't want there to be fights. All the rabbis have to agree. You cannot have a situation where you have two different opinions. Can you imagine what they would think about us today, right?
One is private and one is public. In other words, a Sotah,
okay,
so rare is just one individual. This Zaken is like, it's
it's a threat to the authority of Beit Din.
Right.
Okay, so that's how they said. And they said, well, the reason they said Shlo Yerbu Machlokot BeYisrael, right? Because if you don't have consensus, then imagine what it'll be like. You'll have different Jewish communities doing different things. Imagine a world like that. So they had one rule for one people. Shema mina, what you see from here is Baal Shemachal Kinyav Machul. It's pretty clear that this opinion is that a husband can forgive his kinoi that's what we just said, Shema mina. Now, Pligi Baravacha Ravina, about what I just talked to you about before. A husband can forgive his kinoi, but does that mean he can do it after the kinoi before the stira or even after the stira? Right? So Pligi Barachan Ravina, Chadamar Kodem Stira Machul. A husband can forgive if she hasn't yet been alone with the person. But once it's happened, it's too late. By then, she's already guilty, so to speak, of being a Sotah, and she's got to test it out.
All three of those cases, though, they're on their way to Jerusalem.
Right. So that's what I pointed out earlier, that according to that opinion, we're gonna say in a second, we're gonna prove from a different Braita against that. But clearly earlier we were saying that even when they're on their way to Jerusalem, the husband can forgive. That is correct. But that's the machloket between Rav Acha and Ravina. And it says the Gemara, Mistavra, it seems likely, Kiman, Ta'amar Eno Machol. Unlike what we said before, that even when they're on their way to Jerusalem, it's too late. That a husband cannot forgive it after she's had the stira. Mimai. What's the proof of that? Because remember, we had a whole different case before. We said before that the husband needs two witnesses to prevent him, to watch him the whole time. Remember we had the case before. Oh, right. I take it back. Come on, the Gemara asked before why we have two, and the answer was because one has to go to the bathroom. Remember?
Oh, okay.
That was the Gemara earlier. Now I remember it very well. So you need to have two, right? Because you can't leave alone with one. That's what happens. Says we had a whole discussion earlier. Why do you need two? Remember, there was a Tana who said, "What do you need two witnesses for?" Right? The husband's not allowed to sleep with his wife. That's his business. Tell him that's the rule. A husband whose wife is a nida, we don't have two people live in the house to make sure they're not sleeping together, right? Remember, a nida is an isser karet. We said earlier. This is just an isser lotase. So that was the discussion earlier, right? We had a kal v'chomer. Let's read that inside now. Mitim Mahadri and the Rabbanan and the Rabbi Yossi. Rabbanan answered Rabbi Yossi the time. Remember, we had this earlier. Rabbi Yossi said, they don't need two chachamim to go with them, because Ba'ala ne'eman oleh mikal v'chomer. A husband is believed to be alone with his wife who he's not allowed to sleep with from a kal v'chomer. Uman nida. a wife who's a nida, which is an iser karet, as we had in this week's parsha, right? Well, didn't say that in this week. Let's say it next week's parsha. She be karet, but ba'ala ne'manaleh, no one makes them live in separate houses when she's a nida or has two talmidei chachamim moving in with them, right? But sotah, she belav, it's only a lotah say he's not allowed to sleep with her. Lo kol shekain that you don't need to have witnesses. Amru lo, now the chachamim said back to Rabbi Yossi, whoa. Lo amr ben nida. It's one thing to say it by a nida because it's true he can't sleep with her, but in a week she's going to be tahar and he can sleep with her, right? She can yesh la heter. Tomer b'sotah she'ein la heter. Sotah is totally different. Once she's a sotah, he may never be alone with her again in his life because if she drinks the mesotah and blows up, right? They're not gonna have another relationship. So there, it's the last chance potentially. So someone might go against the halacha. I'll ask the Gemara, but amrit. If you're correct, the la'achar stira machula, that he can just forgive it. So what do you mean it's the last time he'll ever be with her? Let him just say to her, I changed my mind. I want to stay married to you. Mishkachet la diyesh laheter. There is a time where he can forgive her, get rid of it, get out of it. Dibai machale the knuya. He can just forgive the whole kinoi, the whole sotah. Ubam, she could sleep with her. Now, shmamina, you see from here, the la'achar stira eno machul shmamina. According to this opinion, once she's had the stira, there is no more time that he would be permitted to sleep with her, and therefore we prove it that way. And of course, you can argue with this, and obviously the Gemara did before, which is that although there's no more time he can sleep with her, maybe even if he could forgive it and sleep with her, he might not want to cancel his sotah, right? He might want his wife to be a sotah. Unlike a nida, where it's not like you have to change anything. It automatically, she's going to become, not automatically, but over time she'll become mutar. Here, he might want it in the status of sotah, he can never sleep with her. So it's not exactly the same thing, but that's how the Gemara concludes.
Can't he say, I don't want to go through with it?
He can't, they to divorce her.
Oh, I see.
Remember, the halacha is that once she is stira, at least according to this, unless he cancels it, right? So if you hold he can cancel it, then that's a great loophole, right? Because he could cancel and stay married to her. But if he can't cancel it, or if he doesn't want to cancel it, she's officially a sotah. So if she drinks, they can go back and live together. Right. If she doesn't drink, either because he says no, or she says no, or she dies, well, I guess then they're definitely not going to stay married, or whatever reason, right? Or he loses his mind or whatever, then she can't stay married to him, right? In those cases. Now, the next case in the Mishnah.
Just with this last opinion, also say that the Ben Sora Morer, the parents also can't go back after they start bringing him to Jerusalem?
Not necessarily. I mean, remember, because we said that a husband could still forgive the kinoi. He just can't forgive the stira, right? So it wouldn't necessarily connect to them.
What's the nafkamina of forgiving the kinui, but not the stira?
Because he says to his wife, I never want you to be alone with Shimon again, right? And then 3 weeks later, he realizes, I wanted to be with him. I want to do business with him. I trust her. Whatever the thing is, right? He can change his mind and say, I changed my mind. You can be alone.
Right, but they're saying after stira, it's too late.
Correct. So if she hasn't done stira yet. So
my question is, does that opinion also hold for Ben Sora Morer? Once they're on the way to Jerusalem, it's also too late to go back.
So I think the Gemara here does not connect them necessarily. I would assume they're not connected, but I don't know for sure. We just don't speak it out, so we don't know. But we're going to learn. It'll be a while till we get to Sanhedrin and learn about Ben Sora and Moreh, but it's not the same thing because it's not. They do have to warn him, but it's not necessarily the same kind of kinoi as it would be with Sotah. So it's not an exact analogy, but I don't know. I don't know if there's opinion that they can't change their mind. Continue the Mishnah. Make 2 lines on the bottom. Metu ba'aleim ad shelo shatu. Right? We said the case was the woman had kinoi, she had stira, they're on their way to Jerusalem, and the husband dies on the road, right? So what happens then? Remember, we said if the husband says, I don't want you to drink, then he's got to give her a ketubah, because he's the one stopping the process. If she says, I don't want to drink, she doesn't get a ketubah, because it's her who's stopping the process. But he died, so whose fault is this now? His. Presumably his, right? Says the Gemara, but remember, when the person dies, it all depends on the Yarshim, right? The Yarshim now own his estate. So says the Gemara, Beit Shammai, remember the Mishnah Beit Shammai said she gets a ketubah because it's not her fault, it's his. Beit Hillel said she doesn't get the ketubah. But my commitment, he asked the Gemara, bottom line, Beit Shammai savri shtar made the kvot kegavud dam. That the fact that she was ready to get her ketubah, meaning a ketubah is a shtar, it's omeid ligvot, she should collect it. It's as if she already collected it. And therefore, she doesn't have to prove that she gets it. The Yorshim have to prove that she shouldn't get it. And since they can't, because the husband died, their father died, she gets to collect it. And Beit Hillel says the opposite. So it's not yet in her possession, and it's the same rule that we know. Hamotzi mechavero alav haraya. If the status, the money is still in the possession of the children of the Yorshim, she would have to prove she's innocent in order to get it from them. She can't prove she's innocent because her husband is dead, so she can't drink the mei sotah, and therefore for her whole life will not be able to collect the ketubah because she can never prove that she should get it. So that's the machloket. Continue the Mishnah on the top of Daf Chafei Amud Bet. What about the case where a man got married to a woman who he's not allowed to marry, but it's not a prohibition like Almanah the Kohen Gadol? It's a case we had in the Mishnah of Uberet Chavero or Meneket Chavero, a woman who's pregnant from someone else, nursing another person's baby. In those cases, we said it's prohibited for a man to marry her. I said for 2 years, if they're nursing for whatever their pregnancy is, depending on, if they wean the baby, you can marry her. It's only 2 years is not a given. We had a whole discussion about what if the baby's nursing for 4 years. Remember, we talked about that as well. So I said yesterday, I misspoke, I think, because I said that they can wait till they just separate until they finish weaning, right, the kid. But they can't stay married. They'd have to get divorced. They can get remarried after 2 years, but they can't stay married because you're not allowed to stay married with someone you're not allowed to sleep with. That's a pretty basic rule, right? So in those cases, the Mishnah said there was a machloket. Is she a Sotah or is she not a Sotah? And one opinion was she's not a Sotah because he's not allowed to stay married to her. The other opinion was, although he can't stay married to her now, he can marry her again in 2 years or in 5 years. So eventually he can remarry her. So it is a relationship. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avua, they said, machloket ba'akara uskina. The machloket in our Mishnah is only by a woman who can't have children because she's either akara, which means she was born like a regular parts of a woman, but she became barren, I guess. So barren's not the word, sterile maybe, right? Akara literally means they took out her womb. Usually it means that she got sick and something happened, and like endometriosis or something. And I don't know what words they used, but something happened and she was no longer able to carry a child. Or zkina, or a woman who went through menopause, so she's no longer able to become pregnant. So in those cases, it's a machloket. Aval islanded, but if she was born and her whole life was not have sexual maturity as a woman, everybody agrees lo shotah v'lo notel ketubah. She doesn't drink, she doesn't get her ketubah. Why? Shenemar, because the pasuk says that if she drinks the water, v'nikta, and she's innocent, she's naki, then nizra'a zera, then she will have children. But an island can't have children. So now it's true as a can't have children either, right? A woman of 75 is not going to have children. But Rashi explains she's a group of people who can have children, right? She is physically someone who's capable of having. She's not now, but when she once was. So she's in the group of people who can have children. And the same thing is true about a woman who is a akara, right? Because she was initially able to have children, or theoretically. But Islanded was never able to have children. She never joined the group of women who are fertile because she never developed secondary sexual characteristics and pubic hair and menses, etc. And so therefore she wouldn't be included because she can't have a child. Misha darko lahazriya, only a woman who can have children, yatsa zu she'ein darka lahazriya, she's not capable, she's not derech to have children.
Can a man marry her?
Yes, as long he can. It's a different. He has to either have another wife to have kids or already have children.
Okay.
But yeah, it's not a prohibition of marriage. Remember, there's a prohibition of a krut shivcha, which is which we'll get to actually. A man who has no testicles or crushed testicles, but that's different. We'll get to. Actually, we're going to discuss it tomorrow. Okay. Maybe today. We're not going to get there. So as our meeting, what about 3 lines at the bottom? We have the following question. It says in the Braita, this is a long Tosefta, which we'll start, and I think we'll have to see how long we get. Nava wants to finish it, so let's see. Meitvei. Hamikane la'arusato l'shameret yavam shelo. A man goes to a arusa, remember this is similar to our Mishnah, or a shomeret yavam, and he says, I don't want you to be alone with that other person. Says the Braita, im achlo kinsa nistra, before he consummates the marriage, either does the nisuin or the yibam, she does stira, so they're not married yet, then lo shotev, lo notal ketubata, which is what our Mishnah said, right? That's Rabbi Yonatan's opinion, that she doesn't drink and she doesn't get a ketubah. But the next case in the Braita, this is again, it's going to parallel our Mishnah, but we're going to add some interesting cases. Mu'uberet chavero, a woman who was pregnant from his friend, or meneket chavero, in those cases, lo shotot lo notot ketubah, divrei Rabbi Meir, like our Mishnah said, shayu Rabbi Meir omer, because Rabbi Meir said, lo yisa adam mu'uberet chavero meneket chavero. A person's not allowed to marry a woman who's pregnant or nursing from someone else. The im yis nisa, and if he does marry her, yotzi, he's got to divorce her. The lo yachzir olamit, he can never remarry her. So because Rabbi Meir says you can never remarry her, therefore they're never going to be able to marry again, and so there's no kinoi, she's not a sotah. The chachamim omrim, no. Yotzi, he has to divorce her because she's pregnant or nursing. When it's time, when the years are up from nursing or she finishes the pregnancy, yichnos, then he can marry her. And I'm going to actually stop here, but I'm going to read a few more lines. I'm going to ask him to continue tomorrow from here. Harova, which means a young man, a man who's capable of having children, which I don't know if that means young, but he's young enough, right? Who marries shenasa akara. He marries a woman who's not capable of having children, or zkena. Vein lo isho banim. Now he doesn't have another wife, he doesn't have other children, so he can't fulfill the mitzvah of pruruvu because he's married to a woman who can't have children, right? So in that case, he's not really supposed to stay married to her unless he marries somebody else. So meikara lo shota. If he doesn't have banim meikara from someone else, lo shota v'lo notot ketubah, right? Like we said in our Mishnah. He doesn't drink, he doesn't get a ketubah because he's not allowed to stay married to her. Rabbi Eliezer says, what are you talking about? Why can't he stay married to her? Yachol hu lisa acheret v'lefrot l'rabot imenu. He can marry another woman and he can have children from them. So he can stay married to her, and therefore she does drink as a sotah because it's a regular marriage. That's the first part of the Braita. The Braita continues, aval hamikanei la'arusato, a person who does kinoi to an arusa and a shomeret yavam shelo, right? And he gives kinoi, then he marries her, right? Either the nisuin or the yibum. And mishe kansa nistira, after he marries her, she then has stira, then she's a regular sotah. O shotel lo nitalat ketubata. Then she is a sotah and she either drinks or gets the ketubah. And I'm actually going to stop here because although the Braita does continue, but I think it makes sense to start it again tomorrow. It basically parallels our Mishnah, but adds a few cases. And the reason we're bringing it, and I'll just give you the tip, is that, remember, our question here is about an island, right? If a person marries an island, the opinion we said was that she can never become a sotah, mainly because the Torah says that a sotah gets children, right? Nizra'ah zera. And an island is incapable of having children. So we're going to see from the Braita that there's a machloket about that debate. Does Nizra'ah zera mean she will have children, or is it a more general blessing that doesn't exclude an island? So I'm going to leave that for tomorrow. Maybe I'll have him start somewhere in the middle of this Braita and pick it up from there tomorrow. Otherwise, we get to the two dots. Okay, Shavua Tov, everyone.
Thank you, Shavua Tov.
Well, and
Happy talking, everyone.
So Miriam's going to carry on, but we got a whole week ahead of us.
Thank you.
Okay, Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.